For nearly 10 months, the US increased the pressure of sanctions against Russia. Welcome to Eagle News Channel. The US and its allies created a comprehensive sanctions policy during the Ukraine crisis, harming the Russian economy. GDP has fallen for 2 consecutive quarters in Russia as a result of US and Western sanctions. Russia is under recession. Along with tens of billions in economic and security aid to Ukraine, these sanctions are seen as limiting Russia's resources to pursue the fight. Sanctions have been a major tool in US foreign policy for more than 80 years, expanding and improving to respond to security and terrorist threats. Recent developments in international finance, cryptocurrencies, and decentralized finance have prompted the US to modernize its sanctions policy. Janet Yellen ordered her associates to evaluate US sanctions in the spring of 2021. US sanctions are most effective when coordinated with allies and partners as of October 2021. The assessment says sanctions should be related to foreign policy. US intelligence confirmed Russia had moved troops near the Ukrainian border less than a month after the assessment. According to Deputy Treasury Secretary Wally Adeyemo, President Joe Biden has said publicly and privately that if Russia initiates a military campaign, the US will respond with sanctions. To guarantee the US is prepared for this situation, the president entrusted Secretary Yellen with designing a sanctions policy that maximized harm to the Russian economy while minimizing the impact on the US, allies, partners, and global economy, said Deputy Minister Adeyemo. Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24. 3 days later, Secretary Yellen discussed unprecedented economic and financial actions against Moscow in a safe room with senior U.S. Treasury officials. The U.S. Treasury Department has slapped sanctions on Russian banks, banning the sale of critical technology and punishing oligarchs and elites. Adeyemo, we targeted the financial system, elites, and the defense industrial complex. The U.S. and its allies have sanctioned Russian financial institutions, frozen $300 billion in foreign exchange reserves, and removed many Russian banks from SWIFT. Washington formed a task group on Russian oligarchs and elites, REPO, with members from 80 EU nations to seize Russian billionaires' assets worldwide. We adopted export limits and other restrictions to target Russia's defense sector and supply networks, Adeyemo said. This forced Russia's military to move to obsolete and less reliable weaponry. President Biden and Secretary Yellen have considered coordinated multilateral action as the cornerstone of the response to Russia, based on the administration's commitment to restore American partnerships and leadership. Before violence broke out, the U.S. consulted with numerous allies and partners on sanctions. The U.S. shared intelligence about Russia's military assault with its friends and partners in Europe to prepare for a cohesive Western reaction. In barely 3 weeks since the crisis began, more than 30 partners, including EU, G7, Australia, Singapore, and Taiwan, have joined the U.S. in imposing unprecedented sanctions against Russia. Coordination makes it hard for Russia to avoid sanctions. 87% of Russian currency transactions are in USD in 2019. As Russia's largest trading partner, the EU may have a big impact. The US-led sanctions alliance includes Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, leading sophisticated technology producers. The 3 allies and the US have imposed export limits on vital Russian products like semiconductors and processors. Washington and its allies also devised sanctions. Freezing Russian state investment money and central bank reserves worked well. Russia has built $630 billion in state investment funds and foreign exchange reserves to stave off sanctions. Russia hasn't gotten much of this money due to the coalition's efforts. Mr. Biden wants to cut off Russia's war funding in reaction to its expanding military effort. The EU, G7, and Australia implemented an oil price ceiling earlier this month to reduce Russia's oil export revenue. Since the crisis began, the US and its allies have tried to impose sanctions but still allow Russia to export oil and gas, even as Washington and some countries limit fossil fuel imports. Governments don't want consumers and businesses to face more energy strain due to the Ukraine crisis. Russia will continue to prosper from energy, notably oil. Russia sold oil for $100 per barrel. Despite a drop in exports, Russian oil is 60% more expensive in the summer, generating more cash. The US and its allies have solved the problem of reducing Moscow's revenue and allowing Russian oil on the market by capping oil prices. The oil price ceiling permits all oil-importing countries and consumers to benefit from low prices. Disrupting a key Russian weapons supply chain also changes US sanctions policy. Instead of causing deep economic suffering, the US and its allies are reducing Russia's fighting potential. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence estimates that US and allied sanctions and export bans have restricted Russia's capacity to replace more than 6,000 military assets, forcing defense sector facilities to suspend production and causing tank, jet, and submarine component shortages. This resulted in Russian soldiers using Soviet-era weapons or other options on the Ukrainian battlefield. These measures form a strategy to prevent Moscow from obtaining war profits, economic resources, and military capabilities. Ukraine, ADEMO. Russia risks a long recession. Foreign corporations have all departed Russia, and the manufacturing sector will be severely limited without imports. Many experts say the Russian economy could decline 30 to 50% from before the crisis. Observers say the US and its allies have much work to do against Russia. We'll keep holding Russia accountable for the war and supporting Ukraine, ADEMO said. Thank you for watching.